Good evening. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm just going to start. I'll just do some clearing stuff up here while we're waiting for people to come in. Hello, Eric. How are you? Good evening, Nigel. Hello, Jamie. Are you a new face, Jamie? I don't recognise you from previous streams. If you are, welcome. If not, then I do apologise. Hi, John. The trick is, Eric, so when you're doing your wider areas of clearing here, if you test, so for example, test out away from a line, you can find, generally, there's one direction the grain will go. So if I try and go this way, it's a bit more splitty and teary. It sort of splits and tears a little bit more. So you can sort of gauge a little bit how the wood's going to react. And the trick is, when you're using a smaller chisel, take off a little bit at a time. This is highly ineffective what I'm doing here, but I should use a larger chisel really. But yes, so unfortunately that is all the clearing that you're going to see for the moment, but we'll see some work with the bullnose chisel and stuff, and then we have something a little bit different to show. The book of that Dave purchased on my behalf has turned up. So we'll be flicking through that. Oh, I see, Jamie. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining in. So the trick here Eric, when you're doing this, even if so, I know the grain is best if I'm going in a straight line from this way downwards. But this line here, I can't do that. You don't want to go towards a line. But a good trick is if you come in on an angle, a sort of 45 degree, and you sort of slice the chisel through, you see the motion that I'm making, these little round movements. Oh cool, I'll check it out in a sec. Yeah, if you make these sort of small circular motions and just slice the wood away. That allows you to get to those areas where the wood doesn't quite want to allow the chisel to go. And then we have our small tool, which works a lot better in those areas where the wood's a little bit more uncooperative, because it's more of a picking tool. It sort of ignores that sort of splitting nature of the wood. But if you what I always do is look for ways that I can use the chisel diagonally across the grain. And don't be afraid to hi George. And don't be afraid also, I can feel here that this is not quite deep enough, and it's going to sort of endanger the line, this very thin line for one, but also it's not going to clear quite deep enough, and there's a possibility it could pick up pigment. So don't be scared to get the knife back out and just make another sort of incision up against the line that you've already carved. So long as you're not thinning out the line or anything, it just sort of adds a little layer of protection, especially when you've got a little bit of a thicker area to get out, and it also is going to allow you to clear a little bit deeper. So this area is a bit trickier here. So look, when I'm coming out, I'm coming towards that area there, which is not optimal. So it sort of takes a little bit of fiddling and a little bit of work. But if you work sort of both sides at a time, same sort of idea. Those sort of slicing diagonal motions. Then we can loosen this bit here underneath. You see how I've brought my chisel very slightly underneath. Then I can get this diagonal corner in here, and then get in with my small tool and just very carefully work it under each section of the wood. And pop that little corner up. And it's always handy, you'll hear me keep blowing, it's always handy to keep a little brush. Just a little brush on you. Sometimes it's hard to see which bits are loose bits on the wood and which bits are still attached. And you see, and I've got this, sorry for the noise, I've got this bendy light here. So what I'll do, especially when I'm working on a long straight line, so I can reposition the light. So if I were to reposition the light over this side, I know it's in the way now, but it's casting a shadow over this line here and showing me if there's any small bits that I've missed up against the line. So if I just keep it in place, I'll move it slightly. You can see it's casting a heavy shadow into there, which if I miss any bits, so if I can zoom in, you can see just here it's cast that little shadow there. But if the light was over this way, it's a lot harder to see that small section there. On that side, I don't know how well it shows up on camera, but certainly from this direction you can't see it anymore, it's invisible. So having the light on that side, I can now see that little shadowed area. So having a flexible light source, especially if you're in an area where you're, so my window's up here, so I don't have great side angled light. Once the studio is built, I've got really great raking light sat right in front of me. And there'll be a diffuser on the window, on the actual glass. And these sections here where it's not really, you can't really get in with a chisel and knock it out, and you can't really use this chisel, it's just a case of using your small tool. And what I tend to do is go down the centre first to sort of give myself a channel, like I've carved here with the chisel, with the gouge. And it's just a case of being very careful of not popping too large a section out. So that means giving a bit more pressure with your stabilising hand. And not being afraid to turn the block a little bit to get a better angle. But this is the most dangerous part of the process. This is the easiest part to chip a line. especially when you're working with quite long, thin lines and stuff. And we can't always rely on every section of the wood to be as cooperative as a piece of wood's only ever as good as its sort of worse section. And up in here, sort of this area here is particularly tough to do this type of work with. But there's no rush, there's no need to rush at any of it. Undo all the hard work now. So you can see here this little bit here is very hard, but at the same time it's quite a high tendency for it to split as it pops. So it's just going slow, making sure the tool is sharp enough. Oh, North Wales. Welcome. We haven't got too many located here in the UK. So updates on the studio. The door on doors and windows are fixed in place, and well, my dad the other day got the sort of damp proofing fixed to the walls round probably 2/3 of the building, and got some of the excuse me, got some of the sort of battens and stuff tagged up that will sort of sit in between the cladding. I have got some photos. For whatever reason, I was trying to upload them to Google Drive to show, but I'll post them. I'll make a full post to Instagram instead. So we've actually got a couple of sections of the hands that I forgot to carve before. So we'll do those quickly, and then we can take a look at this book. That's not a stupid question at all, Jamie. Yeah, so I can explain. So, it's sort of a bit of both. So, the wood, I don't know how well you're going to be able to see. So, the actual veneer on this cherry is about 6mm. And when you're carving with the knife, I don't know how much or little you'll be able to see in terms of the depth of how deep I've carved, but it all depends on how wide the area is. A section like this area here, I've got to carve a lot deeper, because when I place the paper down, let's simulate. Do I have a piece of paper? No, I don't. Oh, there's a scrap down here. When I place the paper down, it's going to want to sag, and by sagging down into that area, if it's not carved deep enough, it will pick up pigment. These areas in here don't need, they're very rarely going to pick up any pigment. The only time they would is if you sort of haven't brushed it out enough. So you're never carving all the way through. Occasionally you might see it on a colour block, if one of the veneers is particularly thin, or if it's just a very, very wide, large area, or maybe you might see it around the edges sometimes. But you're only ever really carving. It feels deep when you're sort of hammering and chiseling away, but you're very rarely ever carving more than a couple of millimeters. So I don't know really how deep I've carved here. It feels deep when you're carving it, but it's really just that very tip of the blade. You're never doing any of the deep carving with your knife. That's just done with the chisels, and it's done in a way that they're called mountains and oceans, or islands and oceans, so that the low part will come up on a nice curve and meet the point of the line, if that makes sense. Let me get my bit of paper again. So when you're carving, if this is your flat plane of your block, when you carve, it's going to be a nice curved plane. Then you'll have the line here, and then a nice curved plane onto the next. So then when the paper is placed across, and you push down with the barum, you're pushing onto the flat area here, the flat area here, this line, and then this is allowed to sag down and be pushed down by the baron, but not so much as it's going to pick up the stray pigment that is left down in the bottom of here. Does that make sense? There we go. It's my terrible drawing. And it's just, obviously when you first carve something, the tendency is always, without fail, to carve too shallow. Because it's hard to judge. It's really hard to judge, and you'll carve too shallow, and you'll go to print, and it'll be all over the place. And you'll sit there and wonder why it's picking up so much pigment, and then realise you haven't carved deep enough. And even once you've carved a block, while I'm printing this, so I'm doing reprints of a design I did for Jed. And this is the third batch, so the third set of prints I've made from the blocks. And I was excuse me, I was doing the key block today, and there were areas that I had to get this chisel out and recarve a bit deeper, because you might get a batch of paper and it's very slightly thicker, or so it's a bit more spongy and picks up a bit. The paper might maybe be a little bit too wet, so it has a tendency to sag a little bit more. Over time, obviously, pigment builds up on the block, so the easiest and then dries and stuff. So the easiest way to negate that is to just carve a little bit away. And if you ever get to see really old blocks, they're covered in these like score and scratch marks that look like they're like this, just like all over it in all directions, where the printer, as he or she's going along, will see an area that's too shallow, or it's picked up a little bit of pigment, and they'll just get a chisel out and just hack away at a chunk of it until it's deep enough again. And it doesn't matter once you're printing and stuff. It doesn't matter how beautifully you've sort of leveled out all the troughs and stuff on the block, and how smooth and nice it all is. What matters in that moment is that your paper and stuff's going dry, the block's going dry. You've got to keep all the plates spinning, so you just go as quick as you can and just sort of hack a chunk out of the space and carry on. Yeah, it's always changing, and of course the weather, because this is wood and the paper is very fibrous, both will change very slightly according to the season and stuff as well. So for example, here, as you know, we get rather a large amount of rain here in the UK. Rains all the time, so there's a tendency there's quite a lot of humidity, so there's a tendency for things to very slightly swell and alter, as opposed to somewhere very dry and hot where you would expect a bit more contraction. And the registration and stuff, that changes constantly between sets of prints and stuff. You change it mid-batch. You see I've got these registration mark stickers on. I use that as a bit of a cheat until I've done the final test batch that gets okayed by Jed, and then I'll carve a locked in set of registration marks. for the block set. It's a little bit backwards, but that's just sort of the habit that I've got into. And sort of just what's worked for me. Everything about the process, especially printing, is it's all very tactile. It's all I feel it's just as much your experience as it is your the physical touch of things. Being able to judge the moisture and the sort of changing nature of the paper and the wood as you go. Being able to sort of catch it with your eye or feel the moisture in your when you pick a sheet of paper up, and being able to then adjust. The registration marks, you don't want to carve them too deep at all. It's only literally is a couple of millimeters, if that. You don't want to be going deeper than the thickness of the paper. So these, it's literally, where is it? Just enough to sort of the thickness of the sheet of paper, where you can see. And it doesn't really need to be any more than that. It's just, it doesn't need to hold the paper in place. It's a guide for you to lock the paper in. The sort of the combination of moisture and paste and stuff on the block will stick the paper down. So when you, let's say for example that this is a larger colour block, that this is a flat area, and I've got my sheet of paper, so you're placing with a thumb there, corner of the thumb locks it in, and ideally when you're placing this one, you want to have your little finger resting on the back edge of the block, so it'll help you guide that one in. Then when you place it down, if you just tap a finger, not on a key block or something, obviously on the colour, the island in which the colour is on, just tap it with your finger, that will give it a small little tack in place, and then your first couple of movements with the Baron are always pushing it back towards this top corner. So 1, 2, maybe 3, always moving up towards that corner there to keep it locked in place. Right, shall we have to be honest, if I'm perfectly honest, I was carving all morning, printing all afternoon, and then carving again up until the stream started. so I'm a little bit worn out on the carpet and stuff today. So should we have a look at this book? Shall I reposition the camera a little bit and we'll have a look at this book? Let's go here. Good evening, Ben. So, this book was made in 1959. The Meisho Edo Hayake. It's 30 of the prints from the famous Views of Old Tokyo series by Hiroshige. The stick-on registration things, these. You can buy these if you're in the UK. You can get them from handprinted.com. If you're in the US, I'm not sure, but Would Like Matsumura sells them. They're like $1.50, something like that. $3 something maybe. They're super cheap. You get 16 of them. And they're perfect for helping you sort of start with that. And I still use them and cheat with them. But the book. So it's 30 of the 119 prints. That was intentional. It's made by the old Tokyo Woodblock Craftsmen's Association. In fact, the one that Dave ended up becoming a part of in the 80s when he first came to Japan. And it says, I'll read it. The Meisho Edo Hayake, Famous Views of Old Tokyo, 30 plates out of 119 by Ando Hiroshige. Specially produced on the occasion of the centenary of Hiroshige's demise. Issued by the International Trade and Tourist Association. Woodcut by the Tokyo Association of Woodcut Printing Artists. April 10th, 1959. And I need to remove the prints from the book, really. But this is just a bit of information about the series. And then, how's the lighting? Are we okay with the light? Then we have these incredibly well made, small, we can see how small they really are, versions of 30 of the prints. And we have a little bit of information about we have the name of the print and a bit of information about the location. And this is actually perfect for me for my research purposes, because part of what I'm looking at is the changing of the areas and stuff, and how it's altered over time. as we move through some of them, they're so incredibly well made. I apologise for the light. We can zoom right in. Yeah, that's this is probably an indigo Prussian blue mix. This blue up here is definitely Prussian blue. But look at the size of the carved lines and stuff. They were not originally published in that size. In a second, I will show. I'll show it now quickly. Let's go to the back because I have one of these prints, and I'll show you how big the originals were. So this print here of Sensei, look, this is, we can still see, look, you can still see the embossing of the tree line in the snow. Can you see? Yeah, 2 seconds. I'll get the original sized one. So, for comparison, this is me next to the original. So these are the two side by side, so we can see the scale that we're working with. Yes, the embossing is entirely intentional, so we can see, in fact, if we compare this one, the area that was, well, it would be slightly embossed. This is a lot older, this print. So if we zoom in on the one, this one was made in the very late 1800s. We can see this grey block has been used to sort of make some branches and things like that, and there is still a very small amount of embossing, but that's more due to this pale gradient coming up and just touching there. But when producing this has been, first of all, this has been produced especially for a specific group, so there's probably more money and resources has gone into this, but also when we're down at this sort of scale, doing a grey block like that would sort of muddy everything up, all this really small fine detail. So producing a nice embossing block in place of that creates that same nice depth and shadow that grey block was used, but probably even more effectively. My prints that I'm going to make from this series are going to be a little bit more around this scale, very slightly smaller than this. But what's very exciting is, first of all, can we just look at how incredibly well made this print is? solid, smooth, beautiful colour. Carving. Look how fine the carving is. There's no sort of waste pigment sticking in areas and stuff. So, this print here, everyone will know by now. I have a image, I have a scan I took of it. It's probably just better to show it. This is the first image that is going to be in the Patreon series. And I think it's so well produced, I think I'm going to scrap the tracing I'm currently doing. I took a scan of it earlier and sort of zoomed right in on Photoshop and stuff and really studied it. And the carving work is so nicely done, so fine, that I think I'm going to use this as the tracing file to make the print from. And the colours will be, I think, very close to this. Obviously we have a little bit of discoloration in the paper at the top, but just a couple of areas. So this tree, for example, if we zoom in on the tree, look how nicely captured all those brush lines are. That we can see all the nice taste and feel of those quick brush strokes have all been captured. And that nice pink gradation in the background, and the pine needles on the tree, and the balance of colours and stuff. It's so nicely made. And then if we continue to flick through from the back, there's this print. This is one of the most famous prints in the series. This is pretty incredible. Made at this scale, printed this well. No, look at the size of this compared to my finger. I'm sorry if it's only me that's sort of geeking out over this. But there's so many prints in this, and the gradations here, look. In this series that I want to make. This print's incredible. I could never make it like this. There's no way, no chance. Maybe in 10 years. But they all need to be removed. The wisteria one I did remove from the backing, and it still sits quite nicely in within the book. I need to sit down and do it with all of them. You can just see when you compare these to the no, it's probably carved in 2 blocks, Ben. So there's you've got the diagonal lines and the straight lines. see these. So the key block's done on its own, obviously. Then you have these more vertical lines coming down, and then these horizontal, well, not horizontal, diagonal lines coming across. That would have been done in 2 blocks, most definitely. Most definitely. It'd be so hard to have those lines continue following each other at the intersections. I'll keep flicking through what we're doing. Well, George, they did such fine work, because these guys were the last remnants of the old days. They were insanely experienced. They were trained. They were the next generation on. They were probably training when the originals of these were made. You think 1959. And here we go. So this is going to be the second print in the first chunk of. This is the second print this year that we made for Patreon. And this is quite interesting in that they've used an opaque yellow pigment in the blossoms. A really opaque yellow pigment. You can see here, this is not too much of a problem. The block was maybe a little bit dry, or the wood was maybe a bit too hard for that block, but just look how nicely carved it is. And the lettering. Yeah. So it's on his Twitch, Ben. He's been carving one. It's just the diagonal lines. It's not the. It's a different print. But yeah, this is the second print you Patreons will be receiving this year. And then we have this, another classic image from the series. They've done really well. The guys that chose the series, they've sort of hit all the sort of big numbers. On Thursday, when I'm after I'm able to pop a couple of them out, we'll have a look at them individually and stuff, and look at the back side of it, because there's some really interesting things that we can learn from the back side of these prints. I'll flip back through, because I missed a couple in the back. So we have the winter designs. And this series of prints is so special because it's such a good sort of advert for the mystique of old Japan, isn't it? All the prints are very atmospheric, and you can see when the series was made and all of the sort of common people were allowed to go out and travel and take holidays and stuff within Japan. that these places that they would have never seen would have been so enticing and interesting to go to. Yes, probably, yeah. So this gradient here is almost certainly, well, it is certainly done on this same block here. Otherwise, they'd have to carve these exactly the same twice. And the same down here. It's just done with the same block. You do them on separate days, you wouldn't do them on the same day. And this one here is probably done in 2 passes to get such a deep black. To do that in 1 pass is very hard. Right, so that's going to be it for this evening, guys. Thank you for sticking with me. I'll make sure to remove a couple of these from the book so that we can have a proper look at them on Thursday, look at the backside and stuff, and I can sort of give a bit of information on how they were printed and stuff. But yeah, other than that, I will, as I said, I'll be back on Thursday, same time. This will be finished. I'm not sure what we will be working on yet. I'll have that figured out. It's some sort of carving. I'm not sure what we're carving just yet. But we will be carving something. But everyone have a great week, and I will see you all again on Thursday. Take care, everyone.